3, 2, 1. Adam Hutchison, welcome back to the Care Home Show.
Thanks.
My absolute pleasure. Okay, so if anyone hasn't watched our first episode, I'd recommend that they do so, not only because it was an excellent episode, but also because it will set the context for today's conversation. So, so in short, when we recorded our first episode together, one of the subjects that we discussed was the Care Postcode lottery, and subsequently there's been some interesting stuff happening on that subject since our episode. So you obviously called me up the other day and kind of said, this is something that we need to discuss in a little bit more detail. Let's record another episode. So here we are. So I think just to set the scene a little bit for the audience, explain a little bit more about the Care Postcode lottery.
Well, I wrote an article. I do talk about it in that episode. I think it was your third episode we did, and it was a bit more about our history as a business and stuff. And one of the things I was talking about it was this link to social care funding, local authority funding, and about how dependent on where you live in the country was based on whether you got paid a different fee for your care, and kind of trying to elaborate on this frustrating mechanism that we exist in and why it works in that way. So the postcode lottery kind of was focusing on different areas, like even counties that are right next to each other pay anything up to £100 a week difference in their sort of baseline fee for different forms of care. And I just find that a really challenging and, well, relatively impalatable. Decided to get that article out there. And then some things happened recently, and it just made me thought, we did talk about doing more content. Didn't expect it to be this close together. And I just said, I think this is something that needs to be debated.
No, I agree, and obviously we touched upon it for a reason, and you felt compelled to write an article about it because, from the perspective of a care home operator, as you are, the difference between £100 a week for a baseline care funding, that's an astronomical amount of money, an astronomical amount of difference relevant to a single resident over, let's say, a year, relevant to the sustainability of your business and your ability ultimately to deliver the highest standards of care, which is that's why you're in business in the first place. So it was somewhat strange almost, the fact that we had that conversation and then within 2-3 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, it must have been. I think the first there's actually things on the table this time because it's relevant to sort of, I've kind of brought cuttings about some of the things because it really got me. I think the first was the 18th of July and then the 19th of July and the 20th of July. It's kind of like 3 or 4 days. And in that podcast that we had, I actually talked about how I got into care, which was my father. So my father's interested in the care sector. It was actually him that rang me. He said, have you seen this in the mail? Have you seen what they've started to? Have you seen some of the things that they've talked about? And he kind of, so I've got these sort of ripped paper cuttings here. I say, save them, because I'm not a tabloid reader at all. I consume digital content and rarely go on it because I don't necessarily because of things just like this. But I felt that we need to have an opinion on it. We need to voice our sort of side from an operational, but from a sector perspective. I think it's important that we start actually not necessarily challenging it, but kind of elaborating on some of the things that are put, because obviously there's reasons that papers and media publish these outlandish headlines. We know there's a reason for doing that, but it never ever gets under the skin of it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you might say any publicity is good publicity to a certain extent. So there's a really big emphasis around raising the profile of health and social care and putting it onto the agenda. Obviously, with the new Prime Minister in place, it's an important conversation to have, and there are noises that some good stuff might happen, but I mean, obviously, let's see how that plays out. But
no, this is good. This publicity is actually good. I'm glad but it gives us the opportunity to talk about it. There's so many elements in it I completely disagree with. Absolute rubbish in the way in which it's been positioned. But exactly what I said in the previous episode is we as a sector are terrible at putting our position across. So I kind of thought, let's try and do that. Let's try and see how we can at least get an opinion across. And it is an opinion, and it's a position. And let's get some responses. Let's get some dialogue going. Let's get some impetus behind it.
Well, this is the wonderful thing about long-form content like this, that we have the ability to be able to partake in effective discourse. It's open for debate. Granted, we haven't got the people who wrote the articles in the Daily Mail who, quite frankly, some of the language that's been used is challenging, to say the least, and quite. I think
this one is just. Can I quote it?
No, go for it. Absolutely.
Look, 1 in 3 dementia victims forced to sell homes. You're not a victim if you're diagnosed with an illness that's based on multiple forms of memory impairment. You know, I just think it's just such a ridiculous thing to put on the front page. But I get it. It's forced it. It's brought things to the table. Let's try and break the back of that and get people to understand a bit more about, well, you know, what that means. Because it's obviously it's affected people, which it does. Care, and as we talked about before, care will affect every single one of us in some way.
Of course, yeah.
So let's talk about it more. Let's get it on the table. But let's get the truth out about it, not just very one-sided or ill-informed positioning.
I think that's probably one of the biggest problems, is the fact that care, I don't think, is well spoken about. One of the conversations I had a chat with Charles Armitage from Florence recently, and we were talking about the workforce and the future of care, and all sorts of different subjects. And one of the things that we discussed was the fact that we've almost got this element of Britishness to us, and the fact that we've almost got this stiff upper lip mentality especially in kind of the older generation, which in some way that kind of level of stoicism. It's served us kind of through the war and all that type of stuff, and there's pros and cons. But one of the challenges with that, I think, is the fact that we don't want to talk about care, and we don't want to talk about what happens when you're kind of in later life, because it then becomes a taboo subject, and then because it's a taboo subject, it almost becomes compartmentalised. And then that's part of the reason why when I was having the conversation with Mark Wolford the other day from Trusted Care about how admissions come about. So they're a referral platform for care seekers, and they've seen people spending a couple of months trying to find a care home for one of their loved ones, through to I need to be able to admit somebody tomorrow, because because of the way that the whole system is engineered, it takes for a disaster to happen, and for somebody vulnerable to end up suffering, which then fuels more newspaper articles like this, because it creates this whole negative narrative about the fact that the whole care sector is
decisions made in crisis.
Exactly.
Decisions made in crisis, and this is multiple forms of care and trying to enable people to be in a much more understand it. That's that education piece, and that's what I think. What I'm trying to do with this, if I'm honest, I don't want to, because actually we'll go into ground that we've previously talked about, and I definitely don't want to do that. What I do is what starts it is creating this education piece. It's we know about it, and there's a percentage of people that consume this type of content that have already watched that know this. It's actually how do we get the people that are responding to some of these articles, and what the people that these articles are for. They're the care seekers, they're the care referrers, they're the people that are going to be looking for care at certain points. But actually they're going into something completely blind, they don't understand it really.
Also, they've had their perception skewed by
this
misinformation and poor quality journalism. I class that as poor quality journalism, because the message doesn't connect right. I understand that big headlines need to sell newspapers and stuff like that. That's just part of the business model and things. But you don't have to scare the crap out of people.
No.
One of my biggest bugbears is the fact that I think that mainstream media has a certain responsibility to help educate people on what's going on in the world. But they need to do that in an unbiased way, where they're able to be factual and provide high quality journalism. And my opinion on these stories is, having read them, it's not, and it creates a very poor misconception of what the care sector is all about, because we operate in it and we see all of the good stuff, and we can sit and talk about that until we're blue in the face, but that wouldn't sell newspapers, and that's a fundamental flaw in the system.
No, it is, but as a sector then, but that's why this is good, and I actually do see this as a good thing, as I mentioned before. It's our responsibility as sector individuals, people involved in the sector, to get the other side of the story across. And what's happened for the last 2 decades is that hasn't really happened, I don't think, unless I haven't seen it. And again, please tell me that I'm wrong. I really hope that from doing this we get some challenging sort of thought process around it, because if we're doing this and we don't get any disagreement, then we're not doing something right. Because actually that's what it's about. It should be about challenging. It should be about going back and saying, no, understand this sort of perspective. I could delve into some of that if you want me to.
I was literally about to say, let's go through some of this stuff, and let's because what we're trying to do is to create a more balanced view on this. We'll recognise it for what it is, but then say, okay, so from the perspective of an operator, how does this play out in your world? What does that really look like? So,
well, I think one of the things is interesting. There are some sort of nuggets in here, which hopefully we can sort of break the back at. But they talk about a poll in this, don't they?
Yeah.
They actually say a poll, and sort of 31% of people have a friend or family with dementia said that they have to sell their homes to pay for care. But actually, that's incorrect. The poll was commissioned was actually only 16%.
So we need to blatantly factually incorrect
It's
just to
like,
start off with.
So, and again, that's about people who knew somebody that might have to search for care, not necessarily had to sell the house. So I think there's also getting a little bit of context around, come on, don't be so lazy with the figures. Let's not use that, banding that around. But that is a really good place to start. It says 1 in 3 dementia victims forced to sell their homes. It goes back to something that I've talked about many times before around how the sector is perceived. Is we talk about, when the CQC release a report every year, they don't call it the CQC report, they call it the State of Care report. The word state.
It makes it sound like it's bad in the first place.
Yeah, it's what, our parents would say to us when our room was a mess. Look at the state of your room. That's kind of the mentality that I think when I hear that word, and this is kind of a similar thing. You're not a victim if you've got dementia. You're not a victim. It's not it's not a crime. It's not a pass. It is something that is going to be happening more because of the degenerative nature of the disease. It's a disease like other things that are out there, and that's clearly proven. Go to the Alzheimer's Society, do some research on it, and it clearly tells you that as we're living longer, and there are impacts on our cultural society in the way that we treat ourselves, our bodies, and our wider experience, that we're going to have impacts on our memories. So you're not a victim of it. It's just the fact that we live longer, people are living longer, therefore there is an impact on that. And the phrasing of saying that you're forced to sell your house. Nobody in this entire country is forced to sell their house. It's a choice that people are making to sell their houses to be able to fund care. Because there is a fundamental difference between the NHS and adult social care. They are not the same thing, and this is the problem. They should work a lot closer together, and we'll get onto some of that, but they are not the same thing. And this whole reference that the NHS is free is just, it's a red herring, because it's not free, because we pay taxes that pays for it. So it's not free. It's never been free. And there is an element of, there was a ring-fence council adult social care precept, which came in about 2 years ago. Okay. Are you aware of this? So all local authorities were forced in a ring fence for the previous Prime Minister to a 2 to 3% council precept, which they were allowed to increase council tax to be able to get. Yep. What I think mainstream media should be doing is, why aren't you challenging local authorities on where that 3% went? That 3%.
Now there's a headline.
Because I know a specific council in the southeast of England, that had the third largest amount of that pot, equating to 56 million, of which they are now in the third year of which there is no evidence to where that 36 million went, other than the fact that they restructured the local authority twice in that period. So, you're saying that you're going to do something from a wider central government perspective, and you're going to change something, so you create a precept. So we're paying for that. But there's no evidence of where that's gone. So why aren't you challenging that in the press? Local authority. And you can find all this out on the internet. The information I'm quoting you is on the internet. The top three councils, local authorities in the country that had the money got 62 million, 56 million, 51 million over 3 years in these down payments.
Right, okay.
Over 3 years. And we are now in year 3, and there is no evidence to where any of that money has gone. Because most councils have only increased by between 1% and 3%. Some councils have written to local providers and reduced what they're paying them.
Which is,
So, things go up. That's the fact. Costs increase. So, therefore, why is it? But that's getting on to something. But as we start to break, in one of this, so where it goes on about these forced to sell the houses, there's a particular piece on page 9 of this article where it talks about a specific lady that they've interviewed. And it does sound, difficult story, faced with dementia and having to choose to go into a care home. Okay, and they did. It's just the care costs were £220,000. Okay, that's a lot of money. But she's in care for 9 years.
Yep.
So if you break the back of that 220,000 over 9 years is £67 a day. But we're looking at it as you're paying for care costs. Well, no, they're choosing to be in an environment that's giving them a better quality of life, if that was the decision that them and their family took to do that.
And to put that in context, you couldn't get that's for an average hotel stay.
BDO Stoy Hayward's figures it's just over £100. It's £100.76 per night, not necessarily including breakfast.
Sure.
And that's research that you can find out on the internet, because part of work that I've done that research. So it's not I'm just picking numbers out of my head. It's there for BDO Stoy Hayward did that research in 2018.
Sure.
The average cost per night of a hotel in the UK is £100 and 70p. Per night, and not necessarily with breakfast. So £67 a day, you've got breakfast, personal care, laundry, so everything, and the physical change of a person over 9 years. This is what people always forget. You think, well, you go into care and you're the same. Well, no, because there was a deterioration in your life that meant you had to go into some form of care, and sadly, 9.5 times out of 10, it's not going to improve. So that means that is going to continue on in terms of deterioration. So what we've got to start looking at care at is an improvement. I don't like the word extension because that's not really right. But it's creating a better support network for you. That's the point. That's what care is. So it's not the National Health Service, because the National Health Service is a response to emergency situation. This is about trying to maintain fulfillment in life when you can't do everything for yourself, and that might not be in a care home. That might be in care, as in your own home, or through daycare, or through community-based services. But there has to be an element where people have to realise that who is going to pay for it? The state can't pay for everything. Well, they probably might think about it, but then we'll all pay 50-60% tax then.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're going to pay for it somehow.
Exactly.
So I think it's kind of trying to find a balanced argument to that, and I think that it's been inappropriately positioned there, clearly, because I get that you're not forced to say house. That was a choice. You chose to go into care. What's to stop going into multi-generational families? If somebody wants to retain an asset or savings within the family, then that's fine. Then use that as your income, and then support your family member yourself. You can't have it both ways, and that argument is not brought together, which I thought was disappointing. That argument was not addressed, what I've just said there about actually breaking the back of it. And that's what I thought was a little bit unfair. You only have to get to the third or fourth paragraph, and it says that she went into care. This particular lady who was talking about went into care in 2000, and it says 9 years. So spent 9 years after 9 years in a care home. All of that money was eventually spent on her care, a total of approximately 220,000. Well, if you live in a hotel for 9 years, it will cost you 220,000, because that's the choice that had to be made because of that family circumstance. It's not. You can't say it's a national crisis and you've been forced to go into care. You are accessing a service due to the fact that you are now you are living longer, because the fact that we are living longer. It's just a very, very. That's the type of thing that I think we really should be getting across, because that's the counter argument. What do you think? Do you agree? Or?
I mean, okay. So my position on this is one of the mainstream media has a lot to answer for this, because they're writing it. They're writing this narrative, and this narrative is being repeated in various different forms. It has been over the years, in a way to the kind of, let's say, the kind of the populace, the population of the UK, who are largely not informed on the situation, or badly informed on the situation, because the rhetoric that they understand has come from this type of, let's call it sloppy journalism, where it doesn't have a for and against argument. All it's trying to say is that somebody had to pay an awful lot of money for care, which doesn't talk anything about her lifestyle, doesn't talk about anything about the quality of her life, didn't talk about anything about the services that she received while she was there, the happiness that she enjoyed, because the expectation is almost like, well, she's just paid all that money and she's basically lived in hell because it's a care home. Yeah,
and there you are. You're starting from a negative standpoint. It's saying that being in care is a you shouldn't be there. Well, why? Yeah, I know many of people that would prefer to be in a care environment than they would be at home on their own. So I think there's a balance sometimes, because I'm a big fan of Home Instead. So I follow, I like the way that they do, and they do a lot of talk about obviously being in your own home. And they actually did a counter article to this, so I check it out and I'll post it so
I'll make sure it's in the show notes as well. Yeah,
because it's a really interesting. It's kind of a counter argument. It's also a bit of self promotion by them by saying, look at how bad care homes are. Come and do with us. But again, you still, if you're in your home on your own, and somebody's coming in a couple of times a day, that's great. But there is also an element of if you've got somebody coming in 5 hours a day, if you add the cost up of that, it's probably about the same time if they're in a care home or care environment 24/7, and then they've got people around them all the time. And I think people forget this whole companionship. That's what people are really looking for. They want that support. I've got an 89-year-old grandmother who is unbelievably mobile, but she lives on her own. But she gets a taxi into the local town centre every single day.
Amazing.
To spend time with. And some of the times the people that she sees are people because she knows people that work in the shops. Because that's her companionship. And obviously then there's us and the family, and we all sort of get together a lot to try and... But what I'm saying is that's the companionship element, because she doesn't want to sit in a house on her own. So... But people are forgetting that. So this is when it wraps to this whole wider community type care of dealing with having different forms and different access, creating more cafe spaces, creating day services, creating sport networks, becoming more dementia friendly in our environments, having... I think that these types of campaigns should be pushing, local shops, cinemas, cafeterias to become more dementia friendly, which means people can actually support and enable within society. Then you don't have as much of this so-called concern that people are forced to sell their homes. But the whole forced to sell their homes goes back to the age-old mentality of that as family we have to leave things for our children. Well, it was funny. I was talking to my dad about this, and I wrote down the exact words he said to me. I'm going back to my phone here, but he said... Yeah, and he made it as a bit of a joke, but he actually said, this was my own dad while we were having a bite to eat, said, look son, go out there and make your own money, because I'm not going to be leading anything for you, because I'm going to enjoy myself.
Honestly,
it's kind of like, that's kind of how he put it, and it's kind of, we're teaching society to say that you don't have to earn. It seems to be a battle. We're in a new society with social media where we're saying to everybody, go out there and create and go for your own dreams, but yet we're trying to argue that we've got to leave things for them. Well, actually, surely if you've built and saved all this nest egg, I think nest eggs is words that's used a lot, well then surely that's something that you've built, so surely you'd want to spend that on something that makes your life better during those years. So you see what I mean? That kind of analogy to me doesn't compute, and I don't think that is at all positioned in this argument.
What's interesting is the fact that I can't remember where I heard the quote, so this might not be entirely accurate, but one would not be surprised if this was entirely accurate, but 98% of the money that we spend on healthcare is in the last 2 years of our life. And there's probably no surprise that the average life expectancy of somebody living in a care home or nursing home in the UK is about 2 years.
Yes, I'd say so, but that's improving. That's getting higher. It is with retirement living and sort of these environments where you're, sort of the top end stuff. You find that people are choosing to move into those.
But that's when it becomes a lifestyle choice.
Correct.
But this is where I think the kind of the mass market perception is very. Again, it's skewed towards the negative. People don't think that it's a good thing to move in any type of care facility or receive any type of care, and I think it's a hangover from this stiff upper lip Britishness that we've had. That again, I think it probably served us really well in the past, but maybe not so much in the future. Around, oh well, I don't even want to talk about it, and that ends up leading to it ends up leading to disasters where people end up injuring themselves. They are then forced into, let's say, the story I always use, great Aunt Hilda falls over, breaks her hip because she's 87 and she's not as mobile as she used to be. She ends up spending 2 months within the NHS, spending a load of time effectively bed blocking, which obviously cost the NHS an astronomical amount of money. And then the family sat there going, oh, well, this is kind of good because she's being well looked after and she's getting fed and she's got a certain amount of community and things. And oh, now she's got to go and live in a care home and it's going to cost £1,000 a week or whatever it might be.
Well, there you are, as if like by a segue. It's just, but therein lies the true issues, the truth that we should be talking about, which is a re-education of society that the world isn't free, and a re-education of society that NHS stroke national health stroke health and adult social care should be one and the same, or an extension of each other. Because if you create a free-flowing nature between the two, they actually solve all of the problems. And I've spent that much time looking at this. It's really it's so straightforward to break down how it can work, because the overspend within the NHS is absolutely ludicrous, ludicrous beyond belief. And I'll never forget when I worked. I've talked about it before. I worked in telecommunications. My first job was selling to hospitals. I used to sell IT and telephone equipment to hospitals, and I used to get a phone call in March from all the IT directors and CTOs of hospitals saying, I've got X amount of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions in some cases of budget to spend, and I need to spend it, otherwise I won't get it next year. And at the time, early 20s, it was, great, a sale.
Get to a deal.
But, as you get older and you realise, and then now that I do what I do and I'm involved in the sector, it's just like, well, there's the money. You're just wasting it because your system is broken and flawed. So as a sector, we're getting battered. But actually, it's nothing. I'm sorry, it's nothing to do with us. It's nothing to do. We are doing as much possible to look after people, which is what nobody bothers to focus on. But actually, the NHS and the local authorities have got no clue what they're doing. And I'm not afraid to say that. I spend a lot of time in the trade association network. And again, I'm not fussed if I'm offending people, but I don't think they haven't got any clue what they're doing. And that's why why it's in a mess. The whole funding mechanism could be resolved by having a static process and a static involvement in how people go into care. And that comes with going, bit of funding from NHS, bit of local authority funding, bit of personal funding. And every single person who goes into care should be funded exactly the same way. Because if you're creating new technologies and creating new services and creating ways in which engage and become more proactive, people won't need to go into hospital in the first place. And that's where the expense comes in. If we can stop that, then that money can come down the system and support the system. And then, yes, people won't be, let's say, forced. People who choose not to or don't particularly want to sell their houses don't have to, but there has to be an element of understanding that you've got to pay for something. Because if anybody who's writing in response to these articles thinks that it's going to be free, then please get your head out the sand, because the world doesn't exist like that. Everything is going to have to be paid somehow.
Of course.
But it's finding the right balance of understanding how that works. You can say about, in here they've talked about ring fencing money for dementia care, and it's nothing to do with ring fencing. It's getting people the money that's already in the system flowing through appropriately,
allocating it correctly.
Because it's just silly for that to work it. Before I did say it before, I think I've done the one hospital thing. £16 million a year if you stop one person going to hospital every week.
Explain a little bit about that, just to break that down.
So, if you do the maths, it's the average care home cost versus the average bed cost in a hospital, which is, again, all available figures on NHS and sort of adult social care websites. It works out that the difference is around £300 a day, in which it costs for somebody to be rehabilitated or helped within the care system than it is for them to stay in hospital. And if you sort of add that up over a year for one person in every hospital, so if you have one person not going into that bed every week in every hospital in the country, there's 168 in England, it works out at just under £16 million, and there's 4,500 A&E admissions every week in every hospital. So you're just saying you're stopping one in 4,500 going to hospital, and that's 16 million. That's a fact. You can't. I'm not just throwing figures. That is an absolute fact, and I can show you where to find all of that information. There's actually a really good website called bedblocking.org, which is basically like a campaign to help support bed blocking. And literally, it's got every bit of government fact on it you could possibly find that talks about it. But the campaign's never been pushed enough. But it talks about all of this stuff. And the majority of those calls, because if you're old, elderly and you're vulnerable, and I see it with my own family, and I'm sure you've seen it with your own family. As you get older, you get more nervous about things. My dad openly talks about it when we sit down. He always feels a little bit more fractious about things. He's 68, 69 next year, and he even feels a little bit more fractious about things. Like little things, they bother him. And he says that. He says it's just something that's happening as he's got older. We don't know why. And I've seen evidence in it in other family members have felt the same, because we talk quite openly about things like that as a family, quite a big family. And so if you're in your 70s and you're at home and you have a fall, or you have something where you feel a little bit unwell and you're on your own and you want to get checked, what do? Phone 999. There you are. But what if they didn't? Because they had a community access care programme and they phoned the local care business. And then we came out and checked on them, which could cost nothing. Because as a private business, we would look at that as an opportunity to get customers, which is, there's no problem with that. I'm not bothered. We make profit, everybody. It's okay, because profit is used to invest. Don't worry about it. In governments make profit as well. It's called surplus.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's lots of it.
Slightly different.
It's just so, let's get off this high horse that, we make profit, but profit is helped to reinvest in the next stage. We're thinking about how we improve our business. We all buy an Apple iPhone. They make billions a year. We're not bothered about them making any profit to invest in our next product that we buy the next year.
Exactly.
So why is it that we're not allowed to make profit to invest in our own healthcare in the next 3 years' time?
It's because you're making money out of old people.
It's just bonkers. Well, they're making money out of old. Sorry. And good challenge. I've gone skewed, but that's kind of where I think that those are the types of things that we should be talking about. Why aren't we having that conversation? Why isn't the Daily Mail saying to us, hang on a minute, NHS, why have you just done that? Prime example, local authority in the south of England. I sat in a meeting with them to talk about an issue in July 2017. That issue to this day is still not resolved. I have another meeting next week to talk about the same thing. In that original meeting, I raised an issue about how funding was working. 7 people came to that meeting with me. I didn't need 7 people there. I Googled, because you can find out people's salaries.
7 people on their side? Or
7 people on their side, just me.
Right, okay.
I didn't know there were 7 people. And including the council member. All of those 7 people's salaries and pensions equated to £1.6 million a year. And they gave up 2 hours of their time to sit in a meeting with me to fix a problem that still isn't fixed 2 years later. Do you think I'm wasting money? £1.6 million worth of salaries.
Wow.
Per year for council job roles. So it has to come a balance with, which is a nice segue into one of the stories that comes up in here, where they talk about, I think it's in one of the latter stages, there's this really big sort of section all about, like, care home fat cats won't have to sell up. It's like this whole balance about you're not allowed to make money off the sector. Well, sadly, the nature of the sector is that it's run by the private sector. So what do you expect?
Yeah.
It is run by the private sector, and the private sector make money out of it. Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that isn't a problem. We run our businesses a damn sight better than local authorities and the NHS do, because it's a fact. I've just given you some facts there that are evidence that it's not run effectively. I've got to tell you this. Don't mind me telling this little anecdote. So I know a surgeon that's based in Worcester. He's a shoulder surgeon and worked for the NHS. No longer works for the NHS. And he created, with his wife, who's also a surgeon, a piece of software. And that piece of software enabled notes and things to be taken within the surgical environment to be swifter to go through the system.
Sure.
And it saved something ludicrous, like £1,600 a minute or an hour. I can't know exact figures, but it was bonkers amount of money in the way that it could cut down processing time. He was in the system. He was in the NHS. He's no longer in the NHS because he took that to all of these hospitals all over the country. And it would have saved millions. And it never Nobody took it up because everyone had another system, and a different hospital and different trusts were using a different system, and this wouldn't talk to this system and this wouldn't talk to this system. He took it to in America, and it's in 475 hospitals in America, and he now lives in America, and he delivers, and he does, and his product works over there. And it was a fraction of the price of any technological solution that was in the UK. So it's just, so I know it's a very, there's a lot more detail that goes to me to go behind that, but I'm just trying to get across this mentality that we're talking about the wrong thing. We should be challenging the fact that there's a lot of money being wasted, which we can effectively spend if we all sit round the table and manage the solution effectively.
I can't remember exactly who it was. Okay, so think one of the real senior leaders from within the sector. So it would have been like a Robert Kilgore or a Mike Parsons or something like that. It's a while ago, but I think the gentleman in question and then two of his peers again, so like maybe like a Pete Calverley or someone along those lines, they basically got together and said, right, okay, so the market share that we have is X number of beds, and we've worked out that if we helped you with your bed blocking problem by whatever percent, that it would save the NHS this much money. So they spend an awful lot of time in Westminster.
Yes,
so they basically went in and spoke to the people at the time to kind of say, look, okay, we can save you an absolute shed load of cash. Like, obviously it serves us as well, it's going to make our business more sustainable, all that type of stuff, but that's no bad thing because we can reinvest it and we can make sure that people get looked after. Exactly. How about this idea? And they battered the door down for 12 months.
Correct.
And after 12 months got bored and just thought, we're not getting anywhere with this, there's no point.
Exactly.
And it's so sad that the people, the most influential people within the sector at the time, the people that could have delivered effectively the biggest return on investment to the NHS, wouldn't even get the ear of the people. I think they got some interest from people, but it was just never going to be able to. There was no emphasis within government basically to make the positive shift that could have unlocked all that free cash that could have been allocated far better.
So we're talking about some things that absolutely I'm acutely aware that people have tried to do that, but I think it's like anything, isn't it? I always revert back to Gary Vee on things like this. Is you've got to keep knocking the door.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You can't stop. You know, when I got involved in the trade association network, all I ever heard from them, all of them, was, "Oh yeah, we've been doing this for 2 decades." My argument was, "Well, why do you still turn up? Have you given up then?" Yeah. You know, things don't change when you stop. You've got to keep banging the door. And it is going to take a long time. And I am personally, I'm a tiny cog in that. I've got no influence at that sort of level. But if I can shout and scream and talk and it makes other people maybe re-engage to think, well, let's have another go, then good. But we're never going to change anything until it's actually nothing to do with people sat around a table. It's probably the worst place for it to be. What it needs is all of these messages that are in the paper to be about that. That's when you change something. It's that field of dreams analogy. Yeah. You get people, you build something and people will come to it. You have to get people. You're only going to get people to want something when the public demand it. And voters start to vote with their feet. That's what makes the change. And that's what you need. So the papers are doing it completely wrong. They need to raise the awareness about that, what you've just said, that happened. Yeah. And what I've just said, what I've just happened, because then we might do something.
Well, this is an open challenge to the Daily Mail then, in which case let's tee up a story so that we can have a better quality of conversation where we can actually make an impact, because in my opinion this just feels like scaremongering, and it's scaremongering for people. I know I mentioned this earlier on, but I remember somebody explaining this to me, and I'm about to butcher the kind of the neurology of this, but it's my understanding that so you've got an amygdala, which is like the thing that basically kicks off your fight or flight mechanism in your brain. So you read a contentious headline that kicks off your amygdala, which basically puts you in fight or flight mode. From a neurological standpoint, you get a hit of adrenaline and you get a hit of dopamine. Dopamine is the same receptor or the same chemical that's released in your brain if you do cocaine or you do gambling or you drink alcohol or anything like that. It's the most addictive thing in the entire world, because that's obviously what's going on in your head. It's effectively, contentious headlines are used as tools to make these newspapers more sticky, and I appreciate the fact that the business model has to be that they have to sell newspapers and public articles, yada yada yada. I get that, but damning an entire sector with misinformation, surely there's got to be a better way.
And the best thing about it is now, I didn't actually notice this because one of the things that brought me to this page was where it talked about since 2001, the average price for care home placement has risen by 80%. Well, yeah, because that's 18 years. You know, the Daily Mail's cost has gone up by 7% in 2 years. So, come on, let's just be... But here, right down here, in the smallest bit on page 8, how does this affect the NHS? You know, you've got this bit over here, and it says, a lack of adequate care and nursing home facilities places a huge burden on the NHS. At any one time, a quarter of NHS beds are occupied by dementia sufferers over the age of 65. Yes, I've just said that.
Yeah.
And we can help with that.
Yeah.
Because if we can adequately support those people. Because the complexity of dealing with people in care now is so much greater than it used to be.
Oh,
you know, we have
completely
the most
level.
amazing people that work in our industry that are fantastic at what they do, and yeah, we can do that. But then there's a linkage, isn't it? We've got a nursing shortage. So, why isn't it that we go, why doesn't the NHS and the adult social care system work together and the whole adult social care system becomes a training portal for nurses? Do you know, why don't we, as care sectors, why don't we, in every single university area in the country, everybody that's training to be a nurse or a doctor at there get placements working in care homes?
I mean, that's...
Because then doctors and nurses understand what it's like for people working and operating care homes and possibly what the possible functionality of how that person might end up in hospital, again, being proactive. And then we're working with universities and bringing them out. We're working with colleges, working with schools, bringing them out into the environment. We're educating people on the sector. It's just like, there you go. To me, I'm just sat there going, so please let me sit around the table with somebody who I can have that conversation with, because that just seems like a no-brainer. In Cardiff University, they've got doctors that come out of Cardiff University and they go into local care homes.
Yeah.
But it wasn't driven by anybody. Do you want to know what it was driven by? It was driven by a 19-year-old doctoral student who worked in a care home at a weekend.
Who just thought it'd be a great idea to give
There you
people
go.
that exposure.
And I met her at the Great British Care Awards.
Okay.
I was a judge, and that's how. And I was like,
Hang on a minute.
that's so I can't even say that's my idea. That was a 19-year-old.
The thing is, people have done it. I know my dear colleague Sue Goldsmith, obviously
Yeah.
had the pleasure of meeting the other day. She's been trying to run campaigns like this, where they've been attracting younger people who have been in training for their nursing qualifications and doing exactly what you've just said. But it's getting the uptake. There's so much work that has to be done to engineer a set of circumstances where that works, and it seems like such a sensible, logical, rational thing to do that delivers so much value to all of the people involved. But because of the way it's engineered, again, it's just really hard.
I get that, but again, that's about
It's not to say that it shouldn't happen. It should be.
But it should be. But that's a great point to make, because then it shows there's another problem somewhere that somebody should be fixing.
Yeah.
Which is, well, if the health and social care work together, then you might be better off. Instead of sitting across the table from each other thinking, well, you're all big fat cats who earn loads of money. Where it's like, well, I could turn around and say the same thing. Have you seen the cost of a salary? Have you seen the salaries of hospital head CEOs? Tell you what, it's a damn sight more than the CEOs of the businesses.
You know what's terrifying. I'll give you a little story. Obviously, I've told you about smashing my shoulder up, attempting to snowboard and not doing a very good job. I went to go and see, interestingly enough, another shoulder surgeon. Excellent chap. He's absolutely incredible at what he does. But I remember meeting him. I had to have my operation 3 times, so I knew this guy quite well. But at this point, I remember him saying to me, "So Simon, what do you do?" And I explained. He said, "Oh, that's really, really interesting." And we just got chatting about healthcare and social care and all that type of stuff. He goes, "Yeah, you know what's really, really strange? We've just got rid of our CEO here. She wasn't very good. Apparently she was embezzling funds, but I've just found out she's working for a trust down the road type thing." And I was, hang on a minute. I can't quite get my head around how that's even possible, but because there's so few people that want to go and take that role,
They haven't got
because it's to a certain extent it's a poison chalice, because it is so hard and it's such a difficult behemoth beast to be able to go and try and change anyway, as you say.
And again, there's a problem with being able to change it, but you shouldn't then block a solution. Because I absolutely, in my opinion, and I'll happily have somebody tell me that I'm wrong. I hope somebody does, so please tell me that I'm wrong. But I guarantee the main reason that you can't get anywhere is because people see it, the NHS see it as paying the private sector an invoice, and they see it as the private sector solving the problem. And it's just, we're human beings and we have an ego. But that shouldn't be the problem. Look at the world that we're in at the moment. The world that we're in is a disruptive world. We live in a disruptive world. Everything that we do is being disrupted constantly. Constantly. You know, I was with somebody yesterday dealing, again, on another sort of strand of my life is just helping young startups and entrepreneurs get businesses off the ground. And this guy is focused on doing something in the carpet industry. Sounds really random. But everything that he's doing is focused on how can he make it easier for people of their own accord to buy carpets themselves, fit them themselves, educate them, all through apps, ordering, all from your phone, voice technology, measure. Really, really clever, cool little thing. But it came from the fact that he's a carpet fitter.
Yeah.
He's trying to disrupt something that essentially everyone would think would be really boring. But somebody's got to think of that. So, you know, we continue to do what we do and we die. You know, Blockbuster, one shot left in the whole world, and it's a museum. Why? Because they thought that streaming movies would never happen. See ya, Netflix, thank you very much. Nokia, market share, didn't want smartphones, gone.
Yep.
Kodak, had the technology, didn't use it, gone. The list goes on. You know, it's just, so there's nothing different about us. But it's interesting that this goes back to, now we just chipped onto the tech, but we actually had a comment, because I posted this morning before we came in to save the people. And it was actually interesting, the comment came from actually a colleague of ours, I say colleague, a guy that we know, Morton.
A friend and also a show sponsor we must highlight.
Yeah, exactly, that's where I was going. But Morton from Sequoia, he actually said, he commented on this public, because I asked people to sort of try and, if they have any opinions, and he said, while it's afraid that it's negative stereotyping on the sector and the people working, it might cause admin and tech overreaction that will focus on process rather than outcomes, not to benefit the service users or providers, which was quite interesting. Yeah. So me talking about disruptive and technologies, actually there is a worry that people then start bombarding it with all of this technology that doesn't actually fix the problem. So I thought that was a really good thing to bring up, actually, and an argument I wasn't thinking about in this.
Especially from the perspective of a technologist, but he obviously sees the world from the perspective of how can we, I mean, their whole thing is how do we enable care? Yeah. Like that's their kind of mantra as an organisation. But you're right. The tech isn't going to necessarily fix the problem. Like people have got to change their perceptions. We've got to start shifting things in the right direction.
We absolutely have to, because actually tech can become a problem if there's too many, and that's one of the problems. Everyone thinks, well, tech, let's create an app, let's do this, and actually the sector is in certain areas isn't ready for that.
I entirely agree.
And there is a lot that can be shifted in it by a change of approach and a change of how we do it. But that still all comes back to the very, very key point at the beginning, which is around understanding of the people who are making decisions and choices on care. And this type of rhetoric, dialogue, narrative, whatever you want to call it, does nothing to help that. Actually, there's some really interesting points in it. Like even in the past, you know what we said, this number's wrong, by the way. In the past 2 years, dementia patients have spent 1 million days in hospital beds when they could have been in care or nursing homes, costing the NHS 340 million. That backs up exactly what I said, isn't it? Because if you do the maths of the bit here about it being half difference, it's about 300 odd million pound a year. That's exactly what I've already said. But why is that not the headline?
That headline should be the big blue bit on that page.
But how contradictory is it? So they've actually said how horrible dementia care is, and that people staggering have to sell their homes. And then right down here in this tiny little print, it said they could have been in care or in nursing homes. They're actually saying, well, we can help. Yeah. No beep, Sherlock. You know? Yeah, that's what we're trying to get at. So why don't we start banging that drum? This literal section on page 8, on Thursday the 18th of July, Daily Mail, is exactly what we need to be sort of banging on about, because I really think that there's some movement that we can make to try and move those things forward.
So here's a question for you. Okay, so if the Daily Mail were to write or any other publication for that matter, other publications are really available, what headline would you like to see that's going to make a positive change in the right direction?
I certainly think that it needs to be very much around understanding of adult social care and NHS differences, and about trying a headline that makes the awareness to bring those together, like that right there, that headline. You know, those words I would love as a headline. In the last 2 years, dementia patients have spent 1 million days in hospital when they could have been in care or nursing homes, costing the NHS 340 million. There's your headline.
Yeah.
That's the headline. Because I'd go, what? So you're telling me that I've got to pay, and you're going to put another X amount of, what was it the other day that they said they're putting, was it 180
1.8 million, that was Boris's.
1.8 billion.
Yeah, billion, sorry.
So you're putting 1.8 billion back in, right? Well, you only need to put 1.5, because the 340 of it's there.
Yeah.
And that 340 comes into our sector, which means you don't have to sell your house.
Yeah.
Tick. Next, kind of. But then it brings talking about fees and stuff. That was another one of the I think it was that same day headline where it talked about the differential between sort of private pay and local authority pay. So I didn't know whether you wanted to sort of briefly touch on that, because I thought that was wrong as well.
I think one of the things is that again, it's a narrative that people kind of talk about and that's written about in papers, is that the private pay market is effectively propping up the publicly funded end of the spectrum. And well, you summarised it far better than I could earlier from kind of an operator's perspective. Repeat for the audience what you told me earlier.
So it's more around, so where this particular article talks about here, it says like 57,000 for a state paid client and £78,000 for a private client. And well, if you work that out again into weekly, 78,000 is £1,500 a week. Yeah, and care homes out there charge £1,500 a week.
Yep.
But most of those are boutique, high-end, 5-star hotel style care homes,
or high acuity
type care. Yeah,
which is obviously like
but that's a choice.
If you're in a situation where you have to receive more high acuity care, obviously it's going to cost more because there's more people involved.
But that's still a choice. All of that is a choice to a degree that people have to do to pay to go to those. So therefore, that's there. And then you've got, it says here about 57,000 a year for, well, that's about £900 a week. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know many local authorities in the country that pay £900 a week for care. Just trying to think,
none.
None, exactly. Scotland, yes, but nowhere, not in the UK. And then there is your problem. Is actually it's not. There's this message around subsidising. People always say, "Well, privates are subsidising." No, they're not. Private are paying the right fee,
market rate.
They're paying that is the fee that it costs, because councils underfund it. And I've got one particular council in the southeast that pay £487 a week for high needs dementia. That's £2.89 an hour to look after somebody with high needs dementia, and yet they are telling me that they cannot afford to pay more than that. So here's a prime example. This is happening. So I have a meeting next week with the DAS for that local authority to talk about something. We're getting into a bit of fee ground, but it's pertinent to this question.
100%.
It's not about subsidy. It's not subsidy. It's market. It's what the market is demanding is fair and sustainable for how we operate as a sector. I've got an individual that's been in one of our care homes. He has been there for 5.5 years. And in those 5.5 years, he has deteriorated in his capacity and deteriorated in his ability to be to understand what's happening around him. So his dementia has formed, but he knows staff, and he has a particular individual, another gentleman, who's become very good friends with. They sit together, they eat together, they listen to the radio, they go to the beach together. That exists. His money has come to an end in terms of his private money, and he was charged a particular fee for that period. In that period, yes, the fee did increase on an annual basis. That annual increase fluctuated from different amounts year on year, and it was based on dependency and income levels for the cost of the home. I'm not scared of it. That's what happens. Again, it's talked about in articles. Fees go up by 4 or 5% a year. Yeah, like everything else.
Because everything else.
So get used to it. Yep. I'm not. That happens, and it happens in all homes. Here's what's known now as what they call in the healthcare sector, in the local authority sector, not in our sector, as in local, as a wealth depleter. Horrible word, but that's what they use. Wealth depleter. So his wealth is depleted, so they have to now are responsible for his care because he's dropped below the 23,500 threshold.
Yep.
Okay. The local authority in question paid £487 a week. He was paying substantially more than that privately.
Mm-hmm.
We have said we will, because it's a local authority, and they won't pay the private fees because they won't go to the level that's true. So we have to drop, otherwise risk that person. Well, how are they going to look after him?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
they basically just say we won't pay it.
Yeah.
So we drop the fee down. We have a floor. And we have a floor, and that floor, I'll hold my hands up, is £550 a week in certain homes. We can't drop below that because actually it affects the quality of delivery.
Mm-hmm.
The local authority are refusing to pay £550 a week, which is 63 and a bit pound above their what they consider to be what they call their guide price.
Mm-hmm.
They are threatening to move him to a care home that will accept the lower after 5.5 years and companionship over £63 a week. Now, remember, I'm taking the hit on that as a business because we're happily saying, OK, yes, because we're trying to compromise on on that person's well-being. And then we're being told by a local authority that won't pay the fee. But my argument is that we shouldn't have to accept a substandard fee to deliver a substandard service. So we then get bludgeoned with our care home operators and like we are in this paper, charging too much. No, you're not paying the effective rate for care.
Do you know the astounding
They're two different things.
One of the astounding things about that is the fact that, okay, they're willing to threaten, I don't know what the increased mortality rates are of people that move house. How old is this gentleman?
He's in his late 70s.
Okay,
late
so...
70s. I don't want to be too specific, late 70s.
But yeah, okay, so the moving house is stressful for anyone. Moving house when you're late 70s it's a physical and mental... it's going to have a huge physical and mental impact.
When you already have dementia.
When you already had... I was going to say, let alone when you have dementia, but the impact of that will probably be that if that set of circumstances were to arise, he'd probably die earlier than he would do otherwise, which is a travesty because I mean he sounds like if he's got a friend, he gets to go to the beach, like he's in a home where he's being well looked after and things. Albeit he has symptoms of dementia. Oh yeah. But he has a lifestyle. He's enjoying himself. Do you know what I mean?
He is. Every time I go in, he's one of the happiest people I've seen.
Exactly.
He's always engaging. He always talks to everybody. Mm-hmm. You know, and the local authority would prefer to stay £63 a week. Remember, you think about market sustainability. There's a whole other episode to talk about the Care Act. The Care Act was released in 2016. In the Care Act, there was two clear messages that came out of it. It was that local authorities had to support market sustainability while protecting the public purse, which is the phrase that they like to use. But in that, by protecting market sustainability, there was also something where they had to derive choice for the individual. This is a complete conflict of the Care Act. Because what you're saying is that we're going to move this person because we don't want to pay a fee, which... It's not I've just said £550 a week is not an astronomical amount of money. Mm-hmm. For what? You know, this is dealing with challenging clients with dementia. £487 a week is a travesty. But this local authority, one of the richest counties in the country, believe that is their guide level for care, which has no functionality. They've taken no work to say that that's what it's worth.
Coming back also to the Care Act, it's the resident's choice. So they're taking away his choice also. So if you asked him, excuse me, sir, where would you like to live? Would you like to live here or down the road? What's he going to say?
Here.
Like 10 times out of 10. Because that's his home. They're suggesting that they completely remove this gentleman's choice.
And that has happened, just to my business alone, 7 times since February. I've had where because what we should be being is commending is the fact that people the time frame within care is longer. Mm-hmm. It's not a place that people are coming for their last 18 months. It is more about well-being and fulfillment of life to late in aging periods. Mm-hmm. Because we're going through a stage where people are there is an element where people are running out of money because they're in it for a longer period. That should be seen as a good thing. But you can't then be expected to... Well, if we're already saying that it's below market value, and if I've got 200 and something individuals in our care services, and 7 of them, I've suddenly depleted in income values, I'm actually diluting my income for delivering the same service. Yeah. So when these articles start saying that private and local authorities are subsidising for the same service, it's the wrong way round. No, the local authority clients are getting it for a lot less because it's not affordable. But in some counties, going back to the postcode lottery, it is because it's wrong. So why is it that we're not challenging that? There's another headline that should be on the front page. Postcode lottery.
That was the headline that I was actually expecting you to.
Oh, sorry. To come out. I think it was because I was in the NHS thing at the time. I was in the figures and the 340 minutes. So no, we could have teed it up. But edit, move on.
Yeah. But again, that's the type of headline that you want to be able to see because effectively it's an injustice, like in many ways, and it's entirely unfair and it doesn't make sense.
I had an email in writing from a commissioning director within a local authority saying the only reason your fees are that is for gold taps and sea views.
Pardon?
Yeah, I've got it in writing and I use it all the time. Gold taps and sea views. I go to it because I do a lot of work in the Trade Association Network, so I'm not afraid to stand up. As I'm a small fry, as you know, I'm not your Barchesters and your KUKs and things like that. But I just think I've got to say something. I've got the energy, so I'm going to do something. I'm going to say something. And I was asked to speak at this local authority's auditorium to a load of providers, and they stupidly didn't ask to check my slides before I went in. And the first slide that I said is that I said to them, it costs me more per hour to park in the car park across the road than it does for you paying me to look after somebody with challenger behaviour. And it did. It cost 20p more an hour to park in the car park across the road.
Whoa.
No, dead serious. And that was my first slide. But that was the fact. So I pay more to park my car than you're willing to say. So when you look at us saying we're taking advantage of vulnerable adults, no, the system takes advantage. Because what we're saying is that we're not funding it appropriately. And that's because the fluidity of how funding works is not right. It has to create, it's almost like an ecosystem needs to come together, which is education, which I hope things like this start to do.
100%, yeah.
And it creates a conversation. Then it goes into, well, actually, we now need to compartmentalise it. Then it goes down to, well, how does the fee? I do truly believe that the fee should be the fee, and it's structured based on need and environment. And then that fee is funded by a little bit of NHS because we're being proactive and stopping them going there. So we're saving you a rockload of money over here. So you pay us a bit to sort that out. Next bit comes from the local authority because people have paid into that local authority for all those years. So they should have some element come from that. And then some element comes from yourself, your pension, your savings, whatever. And everybody's the same. There's going to be a modicum of difference. And then people, if they want to pay £1,500, £2,000, £2,500 a week, then that's their choice. And then this bit that's yours goes a bit more. But then you have to realise if you don't want to do this and it flexes down, you might be in a slightly different standard of environment. And if anybody shoots me down for making that comment, then sorry. But it's the fact. It's if I choose to stay in a different type of hotel, I choose to stay in a travel lodge, or I choose to stay in a Savoy, or I choose to stay in a Pullman, or we're in London at the moment, so they're the ones I passed on the way here. Not that I stay in any of them. But so do you see what I mean? That's a personal choice. So why are we saying that you can't make that personal choice? The family can't make that choice
According
at that time.
To the Care Act, that it should be down to choice, though, shouldn't it?
Exactly.
That's part of the what.
So you can't then say I'm forced to sell my house if you're choosing to pay £2,500 a week when you could pay £1,000 a week. That's. So there has to be an element saying I think that some of it should be supported by the system, but it's almost that element comes from. I'm not saying that there's not massive differences between some of them, but some of them you have got a luxury element and you have got a sort of a mid-market element, and then you've probably got an older stock element, and that's the fact. You know, whether you kind of got a top 20%, a middle 60%, and a bottom 20%. I don't know whether anybody would disagree with me. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean,
do you think that that's probably about the case in terms of the levels of quality of buildings? Let's talk.
As an example,
I'm talking services and facilities, not care delivery.
Because
they're totally
100%.
different.
Okay, so I had two grandmas, both called Olive. One was a hairdresser, lived in Acox Green, and bless her, she was a real character, but she came from a very, very kind of humble kind of lower middle class area, if you like. And then my grandma, who was also called Olive, her husband was an entrepreneur, one of my biggest influences, albeit I never got to meet him, unfortunately. If you put both grandma in the kind of opposing care environment, both of them would feel, I think, uncomfortable with it. So if my nan had been in the Bupa home that my grandma was in down on the south coast. That wouldn't have felt right for her anyway, because it wouldn't have been the environment in which she was accustomed. My nan had no interest in bells and whistles. She just wanted a cuppa. She wanted to be able to watch Coronation Street and have a chinwag with people. Whereas my grandma, she'd probably want a nice meal. She might want quite a smart pudding. She might want to be able to fill in the blank, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a comparison around the fact that relevant to, let's call it, their socio-economic grouping largely dictated their level of expectation in life, working on the basis that there is the same level of care throughout the system. If you're in an older style of care home, but it's in line with your level of expectations, but it costs less because maybe you haven't accumulated so much wealth, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's where you're going to feel more comfortable in living in the first place. It's the same as like some people. Okay, we've got some incredible new build facilities that are £2,000 a month and they look like hotels. If you live in an environment where, sorry, £2,000 a week, yeah, of course. If you live in an environment which is opulent and swanky, and you've got, I don't know, a bar, or most people haven't got a bar, but
I know.
If that's what you expect in life, then that's exactly where you want, because it should be your choice to be in an environment where you can have like silver service, or have private dining, or have an on-site, or that type of stuff.
But we shouldn't be made. I even feel sometimes, like even as I was having this conversation with you now, I almost felt like, oh, am I allowed to say that? See, I shouldn't feel like that, because actually that is okay to say. We are creatures of habit, and we all want different things. Therefore, there is a level of pricing difference between what people want to pay for certain things. I shouldn't. That's the system.
Engineered
so why are we then why are we having a go about it?
Engineered in the way that you suggested. Again, clearly, I'm an advocate of that. People have then got the choice. As you say, you could choose to effectively provide your own personal top-up, let's call it, and say, right, okay, I've accumulated this much. I can look at my bank and I can say, so I need 4 years worth of headroom as I go into care, and this is what I expect it to cost and things like that. I can afford to pay an extra £250 maybe for these years, and maybe if my needs change, then maybe that might have to go up to £500 for the remaining 2 years.
Correct.
But if I map all of that out, I should have that. If I'm 78, I should be in the best possible environment. I should have the best possible lifestyle throughout that period of time. You might be accumulating millions.
Yeah. But that's not our fault as operators, like this makes out. That's not our fault. That's people's responsibility to have an awareness to that. That's what we should be talking about. Not putting on both of these articles, there's a big red box and it says end the dementia care cost betrayal. It's no betrayal. It's a cost that we've got to pay. It's a cost that people are going to have to pay for somebody within their family, within their lifestyle. And we just need to understand how, not we don't need to understand, people need to understand how that works. We need to break the back of it. But there is this ecosystem that needs to come together to say this is how we're going to enable that to be more effective. One of the best things I always think about as well is, again, I have this conversation with people and people shoot me down. I don't know many people in their 80s that have ever had an ensuite, or a cinema in the building that they live in, or a waterfall in the hallway.
That was my point. Like again, it's
that's not necessarily a choice, is it?
Yeah,
That's
no, exactly.
So I think you might have talked about this with John. This whole sort of John Chapman, Pinders.
Oh yeah,
talked about actually. I think we've stagnated design and all sorts of things like that. Like my opinion is I'll be honest with you. We're looking at building. Well, we're starting building brand new care environments as we speak. I've got no cinemas in mind that I'm designing. Do you want to know why? Do you know what I have got? I've got a carport outside for 2 minibuses, and I'll buy 2 minibuses. And what are those minibuses going to do? We're going to create a connection with the local cinema, and we're going to take people to the cinema if that's where they want to go.
Like a real meaningful experience.
Well, if they want to go to cinema, they'll say, if one person wants to go to cinema, we'll take them to cinema.
Yeah.
And the cost of building a cinema in my care home will pay for people to go to cinema for 5 years. So why would I not do that? And then have a treatment space for somebody instead. Because that would be more focused on their re-enablement, on their movement, on their structure as a human being. You know, we forget that if you do exercise and if you do movement and if you do brain-based activities within the care environment, you're much more likely to be stimulated.
Yeah.
Actually, sitting in a dark room where nobody can talk to each other, watching a film that you possibly wouldn't even choose to go on because there's a menu, How is that stimuli? It's not. It's a sales pitch for a hotel. So choose what you want. Don't say this when you've chose to go there. And that's me really getting into probably a contentious level. I just don't think that we're thinking about anything to do with the next decade, and none of this is helping to do that. All it actually does is just make it more difficult for us to solve the problem.
One of John's favourite anecdotes, and this is one that he brought up in our episode, he said, I can't wait to see a headline that says, we've opened a 3-star care home. And what he's saying by that is it doesn't have to have all these bells and whistles. It just has to be a really, really good, functional care home that is a perfect environment to deliver great care.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about to you, isn't it? I firmly believe that. I would prefer, because what people forget, and again, this is more exposure, this is what people should know. Please, general public, understand this. Your fee is based on the services that you get. So the more expensive that building costs to build, you pay for it in your weekly fee. Because to build that building, somebody is borrowing money to do that. And that money has to get repaid with a level of interest ranging from mortgage levels up to high investment returns. And all of that comes in your fee. The person pays to go there. Remember that. So the more stuff you get, the more you're going to have to pay. And that's just kind of how it's going to work through the system. So if we want to make something more sustainable and more manageable, there has to be, exactly like that is what John says, is that movement towards something more sustainable, but we're using wider experiences. You know, if somebody wants to go to the bistro, then we go to a bistro in town, and then we'll go to a different one the next day, and a different one the next day. And part of care becomes getting people out and about. If you look at younger adults care live in majority of sort of small houses, environments, independent living communities, and the care team and healthcare assistants that work in those environments spend most of their time out and about in the community. So why are we saying that because I just think it's 5-star institutionalisation to a degree. And so that you get some realism behind, and that's the stuff that we should be talking about. That's interesting to me. That's not, it's not a scandal, is it?
How do we change the rhetoric then? What do we need to do as a sector, in your opinion, to start shifting people's perceptions?
More of this. Public education. We started at the top there, that ecosystem, that beginning of that curve. It's education. Educate the people that are going to make decisions over the next 10 years. You and I are going to have to make decisions on this, because at some point we're going to have to think about care. Well, you've already had to with your grandparents, because you said, you know, in my instances, I've actually got nobody that's actually in care or receiving any care. You know, elderly grandparents still look after themselves quite capably, which is, you know, great, which is fine. But at some point, I'm going to have to make a supportive decision on that. But I'm educated on it.
Yeah, you understand.
Other people aren't. So we need to stop stuff like this, and we need to actually have TV shows, and we need to have discussions, and we need to have content, and we need to have articles in the public domain that send that type of message and give people the opportunity to look at other things and different areas and say, oh, that's where I get that information from. Like this backup to this Daily Mail story that we found. We need to give people access to stuff like this. I think that we have a responsibility as a sector to operate. You know, the Care Home Open Day is a prime example. We ran a massive campaign across our group recently. We had loads of people in the local community. We had, you know, parish churches, town communities, schools, trying to get involved.
Everyone involved, yeah.
So then it changes the perception. That's the big key message. And then message in terms of, like, from a wider is, everybody please get wise to what's happening in their local authorities. Because it's borderline abuse, in my opinion, what happens in terms of funding in local authorities. You know, it's I suppose it makes me feel sick. What I experience on a weekly basis with how local authorities manage money is wrong. And one thing, and that's why I started with that postcode lottery article, because I want people to know what goes on. Because if it was me and I did that job for a living, I couldn't sleep at night. But so there is something that's being done within local authorities to make people benign to what they're doing. So it's not about people, because you have to have a certain type of training or a certain message sent to you to be able to say to somebody, We will only pay you £2.97 an hour to look after somebody with severe challenging behaviour and dementia who's double incontinent and needs 2 people to support them. And we will move them if you don't accept it. And I've got writing that says that only last week about this gentleman that I talked about. And that's not the only one that's happened. That's just me. I'm just openly talking about it.
Sure.
I've got people that come... I had a care home operator phone me up the other day. He's distraught because he hasn't been paid by a local authority for 5 months.
It's not the first time.
That's okay. That's all right. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Try not paying your council tax for 5 months.
Yeah. Course order
It's just completely wrong. It's completely wrong. And that is the education. That will change things. If people tell me that I'm wrong, great. Then get out there and help me prove it's wrong then. Because by arguing and challenging our opinions on this is what will get proper stories and proper headlines together. That's what I want.
I think that I made a point earlier about the fact that I think that the mainstream media has a responsibility to be able to help educate the populace on the population of the country around the important subjects that are going on in the sector. And I think at the moment, I think they're doing the UK a disservice by having these types of headlines. What to change people's, like we're humans, we're people of habit, and our perceptions and things like that are derived from our kind of stimuli. As you said, there needs to be a cadence, an ongoing cadence of a more positive rhetoric for people's opinions to start to change. Hopefully today's episode will go some way towards that. I'd like people to get involved in this debate equally as much as you, and I think we need to try and get the message out there in any way that we can. So, do you
want to know one of the things I'd just like to put in there is,
yeah, of course, from
a central government perspective, stop adult social care being the small print. That's what we've got to talk about. That's the message. Stop adult social care being the small print.
And in the media as well, because it is. I mean, it's a prime example of exactly.
Because it's
message.
always health first. Social care can fix health. We can fix health. I know it.
Well, there's a clear message for Boris, our new Prime Minister. We'll try and make sure in any way, shape or form that the message can be passed on to...
Social care minister. You're not just the health minister. You are the health and social care minister. And being as one is because those two things need to work in tandem together and understand that each other are there to support each other. And then it will work. Because you say, Boris can stand up there and say, back British business. We're British business, by the way. Hello.
Yeah.
Back us, and we'll actually help sort out a central government problem. There you go. There's my message.
How do you summarise the conversation for today? What's the kind of final message that you want to be able to share with the world?
Let's bring the positive stories to the forefront. Let's talk about the challenges that are out there. Engage in proper, active solutions to deliver. As a managing director that I had many years ago said to me, "Don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution." These are problems. Let's work on some solutions from positive talk.
I couldn't think of any other better way to end than that. So, Adam Hutchison, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Yeah.